Hi everyone, we are with our anthology And They Lived Ever After at Kunzum, thanks to HarperCollins, our publisher. I'm Nidhi Goyal, I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, and we are very, very proud and delighted and excited to present this anthology And They Lived Ever After with HarperCollins. And today we are at Kunzum to have a little bit of a chat with you. I am very fortunate to have with me Aditi Rao. She really does not need a long introduction, an award-winning author herself. She was invited by Rising Flame, and we're very grateful that she took this up, the process, and facilitated the workshop for us with women with disabilities from South Asia. And the product is right here in front of you, a world of stories, 13 stories that open up, alternate worlds, alternate realities, but realities that are close to us and that we resonate with. So, retelling of fairy tales, Aditi, if I can ask you a question. Retelling fairy tales is not a new concept. Feminist retellings have been happening for very, very, very long, right? And when we decided, and of course I can share more about how we decided why I wanted this, but from your perspective, what did it mean for you to facilitate this kind of a workshop where disabled women were rewriting fairy tales and claiming those spaces?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like we talked about, there have been many feminist retellings, and I also imagine that there were always many tellings of these stories before they got sort of codified into these singular versions. And I think for me, this process is an expansion of the feminist retellings. It's just a more intersectional kind of a feminist retelling. But it was a really interesting space doing the workshops, hearing the participants' interpretations and their lenses on it. Just because I don't think there has been enough space in traditional publishing for perspectives that center disability and at the same time are not, in a sense, not about disability. They're retelling the story. Like one of the ones that I remember early on in the process that really struck me was the reimagining of Rapunzel as a wheelchair user. And it made the whole idea of being stuck in this tower so different. And it almost made more sense than the original version.
Right.
And I think, and then the process of how it was, like what Rapunzel wanted, agency, right? There, what she wanted wasn't just to marry the prince, but for the kingdom to become accessible. Like it was, I remember that one always because I think that was the first one that made me really understand what this kind of retelling was doing, where it wasn't just that a character here happens to have a disability, but where that was not just her lens, but also what she took from and her dreams, and because she was a whole person. And yeah, I think fairy tales are such interesting archetypes to work with, and that's why so many people have been retelling them for a long time and reinterpreting them. This was just a very, I think the fact that it was so clear on, the brief was so clear, it would really enable a very powerful reinterpretation.
Right. No, I think Aditi, for us it was very important. So as a disabled woman, I was thinking, right, because when I grew up, I had the power of stories that as a teenager that you look at cinema, right? And that's influencing the way you look at yourself. Forget about the way you look at the world and you interact with it, right? And the dents that it could leave when you were a disabled person, with the way that disability was represented. So if you see in any of the popular media, right, that disability is not just humor, but it's villainous, right? It's everything negative is disability. And we've been talking about in the movement or just as disabled people that there's a lot to us other than our disability. So one, stop viewing the disability in a negative light, which a lot of stories did. And second, that there's a lot more to us than our disability, which is exactly what you said, that Rapunzel had a personality. She had a character, she had a voice, and she needed that agency, not just a freedom from the tower. And what can freedom from the tower look like, right? And I'm just continuing with that example. And what agency means when you're not, you're a woman, of course, but you're a woman with a disability. responsibility, how that agency takes a different meaning, which maybe as women also we sometimes don't imagine. So I think, and challenging the idea of love, challenging the idea of beauty, it's so amazing because all the fairy tales and children believe in this because you're immediately talking about blue eyes are beautiful. But I don't remember, I could see before, I don't remember any of my friends having blue eyes. So were none of us beautiful? It's a big question that we have, right? It's always this very important thing that we want to challenge. So I think the reason I approached you and we at Rising Flame really committed to this was because we wanted to find ourselves as people in these strong cycles, right? And challenge them and change them in a way that these stories became an everyday part of people's lives, right? So we were just at, we just met one of the mothers and she said that my 6-year-old has never read the original fairy tales and she was buying this book for her son. And I was like, wow. So what the son is going to know from Ugly Duckling is not that the duckling is ugly, that she was doing. And he would just appreciate that from the beginning. For him, the reality would be that Snow White was dead. Right? That he would never know that there was another version of Snow White. So it's only which stories are we being exposed to, and I think that's really important, and we're really grateful that you facilitate. I still remember the second session or first session of the day. You gave us a little bit of exercise and all of us put it down. Because you just asked us to write something from our life because we wanted to bring our lives into these stories. And I think each of us as a disabled woman, and while I was from the organizing team, I was also participating in the workshop. And I think for us, the everyday illnesses, the trauma, the rejections, any experience, right? And I think the deep-seated, which you've covered up or moved on with, I think those experiences came out first. And I think we were in smaller groups and all of us were into this. And we were like, okay, so I've not thought of it this way, but the prolonged immediately reminded me of this, right? And I didn't realize that this was so much a part of my life. So I think there's so many fun moments also. There's assertion in the book, there is conversation in the book, there is fun. Somebody was asking me, so how is this book South Asian? Right? And I would like you to speak a little more about why this context and why majority of the women with disabilities being from India and then Sri Lanka as well, but really South Asia, right? What does that cultural thing do to the book? But I will just give one example to someone. There are 2 Cinderellas, one of them I've written, and I rewrote that Cinderella because of Aditi saying that you can move the character in time. So don't think about the Cinderella's journey to meeting a prince. What happens after she meets? Right? And so I wrote a Cinderella like that, but my Cinderella is Punjabi. The other Cinderella is eating Bengali food. So I think there's a chatak of aloo in it, right? I mean, just those 2 examples of giving people, but what does it mean to come from a cultural context when you write? It's something that I want to ask you. Sorry, it's a long conversation, but I definitely want to ask you.
Yeah, I think that's, one of the really fun things. Again, if you start thinking of these characters as archetypes more than like they have to be in a certain place and time. And it's interesting you bring that up because one of the pieces we talked about of mine in the context of this was called The Little Mermaids, which was again, when I had first looked at that story and just thinking about this idea of giving up your voice because men will love you for your eyes and your hips, felt like something that like Punjabi aunties told me all my life,
right.
Even though it was supposedly coming from like this other fairy tale and different context. And I think that is always what I find the most interesting in retellings, that we do bring our lives to it, right? And we bring in this context our lives as women, as South Asian women, as South Asian women with a disability or chronic illness. And that was a really interesting piece to see how sort of the core of the story of what happens in it can stay quote unquote true to the original, and yet the story can be told in one's own life and in one's own context. I think the other thing I was thinking about as you were speaking, and I think this is very much a narrative, probably think globally too to some degree, but definitely in India or South Asia, where the narrative around disability, when it isn't comedy or villainous, is also a narrative of powerlessness. Right? It is a narrative of pity, it is a narrative of helplessness. And I think that is to me the most interesting thing about a book like this, where the telling of these stories is an assertion of power, right? It is an assertion of agency, of getting to take control of that story. And I think tying back to your earlier question, I think that is one of the things that makes this so important and so unique. I think in some ways, of course, even around gender, there is a narrative of powerlessness, but I think that's shifted in the last century or so to a large extent in popular imagination at least. But I think it hasn't yet shifted in the disability context, and I think this book, this idea that these women are going to take back these stories and tell them in ways that are meaningful to them, in some living with disability, is really interesting in that position.
So reclaiming spaces, asserting power, claiming your agency, having a choice, and voicing what you want to say. I think all of this together, the book does so beautifully, and it's incredible because when we say removing the powerlessness, one would imagine, or popularly it is believed that you will not show vulnerability. But I think the power is in showing vulnerability, but also claiming agency within those spaces of vulnerability. And I think that's been done so beautifully in the whole explanation of how this duckling, by not calling it autistic, but how the duckling is trying to mask, how it's overwhelmed, but finding the space, right? And I think those stories speak so much more louder than someone standing up and saying, hey, disabled people are, we need to empower people with disabilities. And I think that shift is what the stories were aiming at, and I would like to really thank Aditi, but the entire team of Rising Flame, and mainly my colleague Shrimati Raghavan, who really held the process together from the beginning to the end. Each of our interpreters, everybody who made the whole workshop space accessible and inclusive, but most importantly, the 13 women, I don't want to say 13 out of 13, so the 12 other writers who really put their heart, soul, and their lives out, and their creativity, and their time, and just so much of them in these stories. And of course, our amazing publishers, HarperCollins. Thank you for bringing this book out there. Thank you for just making this dream a vision that I started with when I started Rising Flame, but also our organization's vision of building an inclusive world. With a last comment from Aditi, we close this video here. Aditi, I just spoke about the process and the thanked people who made it inclusive and what this inclusive, accessible writing process means for you. If you can just, as last words.
Yeah, and thank you for envisioning and dreaming of this and bringing us into it. I think for me also, if you remember, we were initially planning them as physical workshops, and then we were struggling to find an accessible venue, and then COVID happened, and it was the first workshop I did during COVID. I think pretty quickly into the first lockdown we did it, and it was such an eye-opener for me because so far the conversation, even today, I feel like too much of the conversation about moving, meetings, teaching, whatever, to online spaces has been about what is lost and not enough about what might be gained. And I think this workshop really showed me what could be gained in terms of access and inclusion. I learned so much also, just like I remember the first few weeks, somebody, I think it was Shrimati, had to keep reminding me to speak slower because I didn't speak slow enough for the interpreters. But it was also a really beautiful experience to realize how simple it is to include, because I feel like the world keeps telling us that it's too complicated, it's too expensive, it's too difficult. And it was a really amazing note on which to start this process of learning to teach online, where it, and then when we did one one-on-one feedback in the editorial process. I had the opportunity to learn more about people's lives one-on-one than in the group. And I think it was just really meaningful to see the way in which this space had been created and the thoughtfulness with which the team was really looking at each individual person.
Yes.
I think I've also said this before that for me, as someone who lives with chronic illness, most importantly, and I think most of which in some days I can recognize and other days I can't. And this was the first time I was in a professional space where I could just sit back, there were eyes and I'm looking today, and I'm just looking at my camera. And there was something incredibly liberating about not having to apologize or wonder if it's okay. And it also made me realize all these decades into my career how silly it is that most spaces don't allow that. So yeah, it was an incredible experience to work with all of these women, to work with all of you, and thank you for giving this outlet, for making this happen.
Thank you, Aditi. Our writers said that for some of them, one of them specifically mentioned that this was the first time she fully acknowledged this. The other one said COVID, rethinking, reimagining was something that held me together. This process basically held it together. It was very, very difficult crisis period. But just one thing, and one of the biggest thank yous that were missing in my earlier gratitude was that our entire team that worked on this along with the authors were all women living with disabilities, chronic illnesses, or health conditions. I want to say women persons because some of them may identify otherwise, but it was incredible to work with each one of them. And the thank you that I didn't forget, but I do want to especially mention, we mentioned the review process, and after that we went in with an editing process with our fantastic, my friend and author again, Richa Korpate, and each of us brought not just love, compassion and vision, but I think the commitment to take this forward. And thank you to, once again, to our publishers and lovely bookstores, online and offline, who are keeping this together and helping us reach these stories to the larger public, crowd, people and masses. Thank you very much.